Order. Order. I now call the Parliamentary Under Secretary of State for Rough Sleeping and Housing to make a statement. Eddie Hughes.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. With your permission, I want to make a statement on levelling up. Levelling up is central to the government's agenda, and we're working with local areas to ensure that every region, every city and every town will recover from COVID-19 and level up. Investing on our local areas has the potential to improve lives, giving people pride in their communities, bringing more places across the UK closer to opportunity, and ensuring that everywhere can build back better. Economic differences remain between places across the UK, and these economic differences have real implications. They affect people's lives through their pay, their work opportunities, their health and their life chances. Tackling them and driving prosperity as part of levelling up the UK remains a priority for this government. As set out in the spending review, the government's capital spending plans for this coming financial year, 2021-22, will total £100 billion, a £30 billion cash increase compared to 2019-20. This is part of the government's plans to deliver over £600 billion in gross public sector investment over the next 5 years, delivering the highest sustained level of public sector net investment as a proportion of GDP since the late 1970s. At the budget, we published the prospectus for the new £4.8 billion Levelling Up Fund. The fund will operate UK-wide, extending the benefits of funding for priority local infrastructure across all regions and nations. This cross-departmental fund represents a new approach to local investment and will end silos in Whitehall that makes it difficult to take an holistic approach to the infrastructure needs in local areas. The fund will invest in the infrastructure that matters to local areas, bringing economic benefits, but also bringing communities together as we recover from the economic impact of the pandemic. The Levelling Up Fund will invest in regenerating our town centres and high streets, upgrading local transport and investing in our cultural and heritage assets across the UK. This could be repairing a bridge or investing in new or existing cycling provision, upgrading an eyesore building or regenerating key leisure and retail sites to encourage new businesses, or even maintaining museums, galleries and community spaces that are important to the local area. The fund will create opportunity across the country, prioritising bids from those places in need of economic recovery and growth, improved transport connectivity and regeneration. In order to target those places in need, an index has put places in Category 1, 2 or 3, with Category 1 representing places with the highest levels of identified need. However, it's important to stress that the bandings do not represent eligibility criteria, nor the amount or number of bids a place can submit. Bids from Categories 2 and 3 will be considered for funding on the merits of their deliverability, value for money and strategic fit. We published the index and the methodology used to develop the index to help the fund deliver its core objective of improving local communities by investing in local infrastructure that has a visible impact on people. The government recognises the important role of members in championing the interests of their constituents, and we expect them to be consulted as part of wider local stakeholder engagement on bids, although this is not a necessary condition for a successful bid. Members can have a positive role in prioritising bids and helping broker local consultation. When considering the weighting given to bids, the expectation is that an MP will back one bid which they see as a priority, and any bid may have priority backing from multiple MPs and local stakeholders. But members may also want to support any bid that would have a benefit to their constituencies in the usual way. Where appropriate, the UK Government will seek advice from the devolved administrations as part of bid assessments in their geographical areas on shortlisted projects regarding alignment with existing provision. The fund is part of a broad package of complementary UK-wide interventions. Along with the Levelling Up Fund, the UK Shared Prosperity Fund will create a package of UK government support which invests in skills, infrastructure and innovation at local, regional and national levels, enabling the government to provide the same support to communities in all nations as we build back from COVID-19. To help local areas prepare for the introduction of the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, the UK Government is also providing an additional £220 million of funding through the UK Community Renewal Fund. This fund aims to support people and communities most in need across the UK to pilot programmes and new approaches. Through these funds, we will establish new ways of working between the UK Government and places right across the UK. The UK Government will work more directly with local partners and communities across England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland who are best placed to understand the needs of their local area and more closely aligned to the local economic geographies to deliver quickly on the ground. The budget also announced the 8 successful locations in England which will move to the next stage of free port designation. Teesside, Liverpool City Region, Humber Region, Plymouth, Solent, Thames, Felixstowe and Harwich and East Midlands Airport will benefit from this investment. Free ports will bring together ports, local authorities, businesses and key local stakeholders to achieve a common goal of shared prosperity and opportunity for their regions, and they will allow the UK to take advantage of the benefits of leaving the EU. As part of the Towns Fund, 101 towns were selected to develop proposals for town deals. All towns have now submitted their proposals and 52 towns have so far been offered town deals, meaning we now have committed £1.28 billion to this programme. Assessment continues for the remaining towns with further announcements expected in due course. Through the Towns Fund, we will invest up to £25 million in each town, or more in exceptional cases, to drive the economic regeneration of towns to deliver long-term economic and productivity growth. We're also creating a new £150 million community ownership fund to ensure that communities across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland can support and continue benefiting from the local facilities, community assets and amenities that are most important to them. From summer 2021, community groups will be able to bid for up to £250,000 matched funding to help them buy or take over local community assets at risk of being lost to run as community-owned businesses. In exceptional cases, up to £1 million match funding will be available to help establish community-owned sports club or help buy a sports ground at risk of being lost without that valuable community intervention. Working with mayors and local enterprise partnerships, the £900 million Getting Building Fund will also deliver jobs, skills and infrastructure across the country, targeting investment at those areas that are facing the biggest economic challenges as a result of the pandemic. We want to devolve and decentralise to give more power to local communities, providing an opportunity for all places to level up. Through an ambitious programme of 9 devolution deals, £7.49 billion worth of investment is being unlocked over 30 years. The recently implemented West Yorkshire devolution deal will give the newly elected mayor control over an annual £38 million investment fund, as well as new powers over transport, education, housing and planning. The Department has also recently announced plans for more homes in urban areas and on brownfield land, as well as changes to our funding rules to ensure we level up all parts of England as we progress towards 300,000 new homes every year. The Prime Minister announced that 7 mayoral combined authorities are each receiving a share of the £400 million Brownfield Housing Fund. This will help unlock 26,000 homes by bringing underutilised brownfield land back into use and contribute to levelling up our country. Mr Deputy Speaker, I hope that honourable members will agree that this demonstrates the importance this government attaches to the levelling up agenda and the many ways in which we're addressing the causes of inequality. I'm confident that the measures I have set out to you today will make a real difference to people and places across the whole of the United Kingdom, and I commend this statement to the House.
for up to 5 minutes. Steve Reid.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to start by welcoming the Minister to his new role and thank him very much for advance sight of his statement. The Labour Party welcomes funding for every town and region, especially after the Conservatives have held them back with unfair cuts and deliberate disinvestment over the past decade. But this funding is only a fraction of the money the Conservatives took away in the first place. Despite all the Minister's claims about the Levelling Up Fund, regions will still be getting less than they got before the crisis. It's a bit like a burglar who sneaks into your house in the dead of night, strips it bare, and then expects gratitude for handing back your TV set. Every region should get the funding they need to recover, but instead the government is pitting regions and towns against each other and forcing them to fight each other for funding. Council leaders are furious that millions of pounds are being wasted on consultancy fees for putting bids together. All of that is money that could have been spent on actually levelling up areas the Conservatives have held back. Now, ministers have deprioritised areas that desperately need funding, like Barnsley, Salford, Bolsover and Ashfield, in favour of wealthier areas like Ashfield that just happen, wealthier areas like Richmondshire that just happen to be represented by cabinet ministers. It looks very much as if the government is fiddling the formula to funnel money into wealthier areas and away from the areas that need it the most. And the methodology confirms that fear. Despite the Prime Minister's promise that funding would be allocated to tackle poverty, the Conservatives have removed deprivation levels from the funding formula. That's how 14 areas that are wealthier than average appear in the highest priority category, while areas that need investment the most have been blocked. The government won't fix regional inequalities by ignoring deprivation when they allocate funding. They're not levelling the country up. They're pulling it further apart and deepening the inequalities that they created in the first place. I'd be grateful if the Minister could now tell us why the index of multiple deprivation was excluded from the funding formula, why Barnsley, Salford, Ashfield and Bolsover were deprioritised in favour of Richmondshire in North Yorkshire, how much is being spent in total on red tape and consultants in the bidding process for these funds, how much of the Levelling Up Fund is recycled money they've announced before from the Local Growth Fund, the Towns Fund or other pre-existing funds, and the government only published the methodology after the Good Law project threatened them with court action. So will the Minister come clean now and publish all the data that underlies the methodology so taxpayers can see exactly what the government is doing with their money?
Minister.
Mr Deputy Speaker, where do I stop? I'd like to trade analogies with the Minister, with the Shadow Minister. He reminds me of a man who's been out for an evening with friends, and at the end of the night, when it comes to splitting the restaurant bill, he's the guy who's complaining about the division of that bill because he didn't have a pudding. I'm here setting out an incredibly bold future for the country in a post-pandemic environment with a very optimistic and enthusiastic Prime Minister who sees ambitious things for the future of our country, and he's talking about methodologies of whether this constituency or that constituency didn't get the funding. I'm talking about levelling up across all 4 nations of the United Kingdom. He's talking about whether individual constituencies get their pudding today. Really, we need to move on. We're talking about significant investment over an extended period of time and a bright future for this country. So when he says that some councils are unhappy about the amount of money that's been spent on consultants, I would say there are many councils who don't have the capacity to build up a bid of the standard required for this funding, and that's why we're providing them with £125,000 each for those in Category 1 so that they can develop those bids. He says the methodology has been twisted in some way to benefit one constituency over another. I'd say tell that to Oldham and Gateshead, who I strongly suspect are very grateful for the funding that they're getting and the opportunity to develop bids. He's saying, why did we exclude deprivation as one of the factors? I'm saying we decided to leave the criteria to civil servants. We set out the expectation of what we hope to achieve. We left it to civil servants to decide what the criteria was, so that we didn't have any of the political influence that he is suggesting. And he's also asking that we publish all of the data that's associated with the methodology. Well, I can tell him I'm not going to do his homework for him, Mr. Deputy Speaker. All of that information is freely available. He might be able to get some of his research team to get to work on it. Thank you.
And for the record, the Shadow Minister did say, I always have a pudding. She's very wise. Video link. Kevin Hollenrake.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and can I welcome my honourable friend to his place on the front bench. Great start. Will he confirm that the Levelling Up Fund will welcome applications from rural areas like Rydale in my constituency that may look prosperous from the outside, but whose average earnings are below the regional average, due in part to a lack of infrastructure investment in the past? And this could be reversed with funds being provided, for example, to important projects such as the improvement to railway stations in Malton and in Thirsk.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I thank my right honourable friend for his very kind words and for his question. And I can say I would absolutely encourage him to work with his local council to develop bids along the lines that he has just set out. Those bids will be assessed based on deliverability, strategic fit and value for money, and that strategic fit element will be hopefully partly determined by the good work of local MPs engaging with local councils to determine priority for their area.
Video link. Patricia Gibson.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I welcome the Minister to his place, and I thank him for his statement. Whilst additional funding for communities is always welcome, I'm sure the Minister will understand that it is greeted with a degree of scepticism. Indeed, the previous much vaunted Towns Fund continues to be mired in controversy and allegations of pork barrel politics, which just won't go away. With this new announcement, according to the Financial Times, we are seeing more of the same today, and concludes the bias in favour of Tory-held seats for the so-called Levelling Up funding is, and I quote, pretty blatant. The Minister doesn't want to talk about methodologies, and no wonder. This Tory priority list ignores additional poverty-related criteria based on sparse rural populations, meaning that rural populations and islands are bumped down the list. However, Tory-held seats in Scotland have been ranked amongst the most in need of help from the UK Government Fund, whilst coincidentally, seats the Tories don't hold in Scotland have been given a lower funding priority, which is not borne out by deprivation levels, and perhaps the Minister could explain this. It's also clear that the Tory priority list ignores additional poverty-related criteria. And of course, what we in Scotland can see is that this is yet another step on the road for this government to completely bypass and disrespect the Scottish Parliament as it seeks to impose this Tory government's priorities on Scotland's democratically elected government in devolved areas, which it already intends to do through the shared prosperity funding. If the real criteria for benefiting from levelling up is not simply to have a Tory MP or live in a target Tory seat, can the Minister set out clearly what the criteria for benefiting from this fund is, and how the awarding of the funds will be made completely transparent, since it doesn't seem to be related to areas of deprivation in Scotland? How can we believe that this is truly about levelling up and not just more old-fashioned pork barrel politics?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I thank the right honourable lady for her question, and I have to admit I'm slightly embarrassed, Mr. Deputy Speaker, because the information that I had suggested that North Ayrshire in her constituency was Category 1 for the Levelling Up Fund, which seems kind of counterintuitive given the speech that she just made about the Conservative Party prioritising conservative areas. I would imagine that council, which I believe is Labour-run, will embrace with alacrity the idea of being provided with £125,000 worth of funding to help them develop their bid from this UK government, I think is very important, Mr. Speaker. We're taking this opportunity to reach out to all corners of the United Kingdom, and I hope that in future the Honourable Lady is simply pleased about that.
Matt Vickers.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Thornaby has just landed a whopping £23.9 million through its town deal, but that isn't going to stop me asking for more. Can I welcome the more than £4 billion set aside for this Levelling Up Fund and invite the Minister to come and join me to look at some projects across Stockton, Ingleby Barrack and Yarm that would be perfect for this game-changing government investment.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I thank my honourable friend for his question. I'm very much a fan of the "can I have some more" approach, and so I think it's completely appropriate that he should ask for more funding, even though, as he says, he's already secured nearly £24 million worth of funding. And on behalf of the Secretary of State and the Minister for Local Government, I will convey his invite to them, and I have no doubt that both or either of them will soon be up to visit.
Link. Clive Betts.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Could I say to the Minister, it's one thing to announce lots of policies and lots of money. It's another thing to actually make sure the policies and the spending are successful in delivering the achievements the Minister obviously wants to make. So could I say to the Minister, what are the indicators that they're going to be used to demonstrate the success of levelling up? And are the government going to set targets so we can all decide at the end of this Parliament whether those indicators have been achieved? If he can't set them out for us today, I'm more than happy if he wants to put that list in the House of Commons library so we can all judge them in due course.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. With regard to the government providing funding and the impact or success of that funding, I understand MHCLG has allocated over £40 million to the Sheffield City region through the Brownfield Fund. So it will be up to local people there to determine whether that money has been spent wisely, and I hope he will contribute to ensuring that it is. With regard to the criteria for allocations for the funding or applying for the funding, those areas in need of economic recovery and growth, improved transport connectivity and regeneration. Now, I know that's not quite what he asked, but what I would suggest to him is that if we're going to determine the success of these projects, the British electorate will probably do that at the next general election. So I look forward to seeing how that turns out.
Video link. Sarah Atherton.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, one of the many reasons why the Conservatives won 7 out of the 9 North Wales seats in the last general election was due to the 2 decades of financial neglect by the Welsh Labour government in Cardiff. Would my honourable friend agree with me that the Levelling Up Fund is the opportunity for the UK government to answer the call of the people and use true devolution via local authorities to directly improve areas like North Wales, like Wrexham, which has been starved of infrastructure funding and therefore progression?
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I thank the Honourable Lady for her question, and I think we should just repeat part of her question. 7 out of the 9 North Wales seats now held by Conservatives. So 7 out of 10, my apologies. Well, we can argue about that. It's still 7. And when we make very good use of the £125,000 that will be given to Wrexham Council to help them work up their bid through the Levelling Up Fund, I've no doubt that the enthusiasm for voting Conservative will spread to the remaining seats in North Wales.
Video link. Dan Jarvis.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. If the government's formula says that the Chancellor's Richmondshire constituency is in greater need of investment than Barnsley, then the government's formula is wrong. But it isn't too late to do the right thing. So will the Minister commit to urgently reviewing how money is to be allocated from the Levelling Up Fund?
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I thank the honourable gentleman for his question, and I say we have no intention of reviewing how the money is allocated. The criteria were determined by civil servants. There was no political influence, and so we're still comfortable with the basis on which funds are being allocated. However, I would also say that the honourable gentleman probably won't be short of cash anyway, because, like you, Mr Deputy Speaker, I'm a keen reader of the Yorkshire Post, and I understand it's his intention to borrow £500 million to spend in the local region. So that area, for one, won't be short of money.
Video link. Andrew Griffith.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can my honourable friend assure the House that areas such as the districts of Arran, Chichester, Horsham and Mid Sussex, which all fall into my constituency but which are not in Category 1, will still be able to succeed if we submit compelling bids?
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I thank my honourable friend for his question, and I can absolutely offer him that assurance. What is important is that those bids are going to be assessed based on deliverability, value for money and strategic fit. And as I've said previously, that strategic fit element will include the support of an excellent local MP like my honourable friend.
Video link. Barbara Keeley.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Salford has been categorised as priority 2 for investment, behind the constituencies represented by the Community Secretary and the Chancellor. This is despite Salford having higher rates of child poverty and unemployment. We now know the single biggest factor in prioritisation was the length of commute by car. So can the Minister explain why funding is being diverted to relatively affluent commuter towns rather than being used to create jobs in areas that need them, like Salford?
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I thank the honourable lady for her question. Mr Deputy Speaker, I suspect that you, like me, are a keen reader of the Salford Star, where I heard comments from the honourable lady where she was talking about pork barrel politics and accusing the Conservative Party of political influence on the allocation of funding, which is pretty peculiar given the fact that just 12 miles away, across Manchester in Oldham, I understand they've been placed in Category 1, as has Leicester and Gateshead. So it's very difficult to make the argument that the Conservative Party is manipulating money when it seems to be ending up in a large number of Labour seats.
Video link. Dr Kieran Mullen.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Crewe struggles with railway bridges and congestion, which risk holding it back. And this fund gives us a chance to tackle this once and for all to help level up the town and the surrounding area. Can my right honourable friend confirm the fund will support local transport infrastructure projects like this?
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Thank my honourable friend for his question. I can absolutely offer him that assurance, but I would urge him to work with his local council to identify a priority bid for his area and then assess that against deliverability, as strategic fit and value for money to ensure that he is supporting the bid in his area that is most likely to succeed.
Toby Perkins. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The cat's out of the bag. I'm amazed that the Minister's being quite as brazen as he is, but a moment ago my friend from Sheffield South East asked the Minister, how will we know whether levelling up has been a success? And the Minister's response, I'm paraphrasing, was, well, we'll see if a Conservative government gets re-elected. It's absolutely shameless. There is no attempt to pretend that this is a genuine process that has been properly worked through. It's purely about getting re-elected. Now, we in Chesterfield recently were successful in the Town Deals Fund, and I know how important the support that councils get is to getting quality bids. So can the Minister assure us that anyone who has a bid, who wants to make a bid, will get support from consultants to make sure they're able to get a bid in front of the Minister?
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I thank the honourable gentleman for his question, but I'm confused. I'm not sure who ultimately decides whether we get to continue to sit here. I thought that we were beholden to the public. I thought it was our job to serve them. He seems a bit confused as to whose job it is to serve who. I'm very clear. This Conservative government is very clear. It's our job to serve the British public, and we're doing that. And they will determine whether the things that we have decided are priority for funding or for policy development have been a success, and they will determine who forms the next government on that basis.
Lydia Link. Peter Gibson.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I welcome my honourable friend to his place and thank him for all he is doing on levelling up? Whether it be investing £105 million in Darlington Station, £23.3 million invested through the Towns Fund, or establishing Treasury North in my constituency. We are seeing the benefits of this Conservative government, and I welcome the opportunity that the Levelling Up Fund will bring. Does he agree with me that delivering jobs and opportunity in Darlington is not giving up, but truly levelling up? And does he have a levelling up message for the voters of Hartlepool?
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I thank my honourable friend for his question. Mr Deputy Speaker, I've been a bit tired of seeing his face in my social media feed over the past weeks and months, with him celebrating the various successes as funding and opportunity seems to flow towards his constituency. And I'm delighted to say that I'm a similar beneficiary in terms of the Black Country, because obviously MHCLG have decided to move one of their offices to Wolverhampton. So it is great to see that this government is deploying staff around the country to ensure that we level up right across the country. Under no circumstances is that giving up. We're levelling up everywhere.
Video link. Tim Farron.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. During this pandemic, the South Lakeland has had the biggest increase in unemployment and has the highest proportion of its workforce on furlough of any community in the country. And yet the government has our community in the bottom priority for levelling up funding because it's using old pre-pandemic data. The Lake District is Britain's biggest visitor destination outside London. And so if the government rethinks using accurate data and chooses to invest in the Lakes Line, in rural bus routes, in cycling, culture and our visitor economy here, it won't just be preventing hardship in our South Lakeland communities, it will boost the whole British economy. So will he rethink?
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. And as I said to a previous question, the government isn't going to be rethinking the data or the methodology that it applies to distributing this funding. But given the circumstances that he has set out, I would strongly urge that he engages with ministers in the department, because, as I've explained, there is a significant number of funding streams available, and I would like to think that one of them is a good fit for his constituency.
Video link. Alexander Stafford.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I welcome my honourable friend to his place. High streets across Rother Valley have been ignored and neglected for decades. The Levelling Up Fund presents a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to rejuvenate our high streets by providing up to £20 million of funding to bring them back to life. Here in Rother Valley, we cannot allow any more dither and delay for the economic recovery of our communities. So what encouragement can he give to Rotherham Metropolitan Borough Council, my council, which is a priority one area, to fully grasp this amazing opportunity to get a bid in for the first round of funding for Rother Valley, so that we can start the necessary work of regenerating our high streets as quickly as possible?
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I thank my honourable friend for his question, and I would suggest two things. First of all, that the Council engages quickly with their excellent local MP to identify appropriate projects for this funding, and that they fully utilise the £125,000 that they're going to be given in order to help them work up a very an impressive and commercially appropriate bid.
Ben Lowe.
Deputy Speaker, I'd like to welcome the Minister to his place. He made reference in his statement to devolution and bringing economic decision-making closer to the communities that it affects. But the Levelling Up Fund seems to do the opposite as far as Wales is concerned, by excluding the Senedd from decisions that would be taken in Whitehall. Now, it does, however, tie the success of community projects to representation made by MPs in this place. And so I ask whether he can give us any reassurances that Wales will not lose out now that his government is cutting the number of Welsh MPs by a fifth.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. I think The thrust of the statement that I've made today is that we fully intend to reach out to all 4 nations of the United Kingdom to ensure that everybody joins in our attempt to level up right across the United Kingdom. And I would also say that as Ceredigion is in Category 1 of the Levelling Up Fund, hopefully he himself will be identifying suitable projects to support and endorse to ensure that further funding comes to his constituency.
Video link. Derek Thomas.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'm really pleased that the Oz Scilly was included in the recent budget for Category 1 capacity funding for the Levelling Up Fund. The transport link to Scilly is the most important issue for everyone on Scilly. They rely on it for everything they need, literally everything. Will the Minister confirm that finding a solution for a resilient and affordable transport system is the kind of levelling up this fund could deliver?
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I thank my honourable friend for his question, and I say absolutely. One of the key aims of the fund is connectivity and transport in local needs. So that's absolutely at the heart of what this fund is about, and I would encourage him, though, to work with local councils to ensure that they identify a priority bid for his area to ensure the maximum opportunity for success.
Video link. Shanwara.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. This government has devastated the finances of local authorities like Newcastle City Council, cutting their funding year after year, breaking its promise to pay their COVID costs and forcing them to raise council tax, which itself raises more in some areas than others, as well as taking money out of the pockets of those who need it most. This fund pits councils against each other to compete for meagre and recycled pots of money, with government departments taking all the decisions. Why does levelling up mean putting Whitehall in charge?
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I thank the honourable lady for her question. I'm slightly confused. This process will allow local MPs to work with their local councils to identify priority projects for their area, and will provide those councils with £125,000 in the case of Newcastle upon Tyne, who are a Category 1 authority. So they have the funds available, they have the opportunity working collaboratively to identify a good project, and I would ask her to work with the council to get on, identify a project and bring money to her constituency.
Video link. Simon Fell.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I was delighted when Barrow-in-Furness was awarded a £25 million town deal in October. It will make a huge difference to revitalising our town centre, bring a university campus to Barrow and improve our cycling and walking provision. Can my honourable friend confirm that places which have benefited from the town deal will also be able to secure backing from the Levelling Up Fund for other schemes which will support our communities?
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for his question, and I congratulate him for the funding that he has already secured for his local area, and I would completely encourage him to continue to bid for the Levelling Up Fund. These are not mutually exclusive opportunities. If you have a high quality bid, then it has a good chance of success. So identify a priority bid, and I look forward to it being submitted.
Liz Twiss.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. If we're truly going to level up, much more radical and cross-departmental work and funding will be needed to address structural inequalities. Now, I will be working with Gateshead Council to put in a bid to the Levelling Up Fund. But why has the government not come forward with a plan to tackle child and family poverty and social care, as well as this Levelling Up Fund?
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I thank the honourable lady for her question, and she's identified very important funding needs there. This fund will tackle one element of the problems that we are seeking to address. As I set out, over the next 5 years, we're talking about £600 billion of public sector investment funding. So through other funding opportunities, I'm sure there will be the chance to tackle the concerns that she raised, and I'm delighted that she's going to be working with her local council in order to identify a priority bid for the Levelling Up Fund.
Mark Harper.
Mr Deputy Speaker, can I say to the Minister, the last
award of funding my constituency got from the Getting Building Fund last year. That's already been worked on, being constructed, and we have a fantastic construction industry training centre that will be admitting its first students next January. So I welcome that my constituency is a priority one area for the Levelling Up Fund. I'm already working with my local authority. We had our first kick-off meeting last week. So can I ask him to confirm that bids that reflect genuine local needs, supported by the local authority and the Member of Parliament, have the best chance of success in getting that funding to turn into real opportunities for our constituents?
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I thank my right honourable friend for his question and for a kind of exemplar of how an excellent local MP can not only bring funding to his constituency but also see the project through to completion. A great example for us all to follow. And I can completely endorse the idea that what we need to identify through this scheme is quality local projects that will make a visible difference to local people in the constituency. And that's why it's so important that MPs work with their local councils to prioritise such schemes to ensure maximum opportunity for success.
Lydia Leng. Sammy Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Deputy Speaker. First of all, can I welcome the Minister to his place and also assure him that I'm not looking for a pudding or a slap-up meal, but simply to ensure that Northern Ireland receives its fair share of the levelling up cake which is available. He'll be aware that Northern Ireland is one of the poorest regions, still one of the poorest regions of the United Kingdom, and that our economic advantage has been deteriorating because of the Northern Ireland Protocol, which has disrupted trade, which has added to costs, and which has created uncertainty. Going forward, can he tell us in what practical ways will the Levelling Up Fund benefit Northern Ireland? And secondly, can he assure us that even though under the Northern Ireland Protocol we are still subject to EU state aid rules and interference in how the government can spend money, that the Northern Ireland Protocol will not interrupt the government's ability to spend money to level up the economic disparities between Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom?
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I thank my honourable friend for his question. I had the opportunity to visit Northern Ireland fairly recently with the Secretary of State and see for myself the difficult conditions that he's explained. So it is absolutely the case that we will be working with Northern Ireland to ensure that we continue to provide funding and continue to level up as we aim to do so right across all four nations of the United Kingdom. A different approach is being taken in Northern Ireland. The UK Government will accept bids at the most local level from a range of local applicants, including but not limited to businesses, voluntary and community sector organisations, district councils, the Northern Ireland Executive and other public sector bodies. Local councils in Northern Ireland should indicate whether they support bids within their geographical area.
Lydia Leng. Damien Moore.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I welcome my honourable friend to his place. At the last election, people voted Conservative, some for the first time, because they believe in levelling up and our vision of spreading prosperity to areas neglected by Labour. Does my honourable friend agree that by ensuring every part of the country can bid and benefit from the Levelling Up Fund, we are accelerating our transformational levelling up agenda?
Mr Deputy Speaker, I thank my honourable friend for his question and I congratulate him for the £37.5 million that he's already secured for his constituency, demonstrating that an active and able constituency MP can bring funding to his area. And I would also absolutely say that it's important that everybody looks for bids that they can support and submit in their constituency, and those bids, regardless of the prioritisation category, will be assessed based on deliverability and value for money, as well as strategic fit, and it's the strategic fit bit that the MP will be able to contribute to.
Alex Cunningham.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'd also like to welcome the Minister to Stockton to visit Billingham, which was told not to even bother to bid for town centre funds. You know, we've lost 12,500 jobs across the Tees Valley in the last 11 months, yet here are Stockton local authorities having to bid into levelling up funds to carry out relatively minor road projects, which ought to have been covered by other road funds stripped away by the government. Sure, the Minister will agree with me that the £4 billion fund for the entire north of England, incidentally a small fraction of the cash spent on Crossrail in London, needs to be increased considerably so our areas can have a starter, a main course and a pudding, as well as a big structural and support projects, rather than just a bit of tarmac here and there.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I thank the honourable gentleman for his question, but this is quite a significant pie that we're talking about splitting up. If we're going to continue to use the food analogy, as I mentioned in my statement, £600 billion being invested over the course of the coming years. And so I completely understand. One of the things, Mr Speaker, that happens is when you have a successful government providing funding across all regions, people see that and they want more. That's no surprise. I'm glad that honourable members are ambitious for their region. And in the case of Stockton-on-Tees, that's a Category 1 in the Levelling Up Fund. And I hope he will support a bid for his area.
I don't know what it is about this statement, but I'm absolutely hungry now. Video link and over to Peter Aldous.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. In Lowestoft and Waveney, there are some significant areas of poverty, and yet, as part of the wider East Suffolk Council area, we are within the Priority 2 category. I would be most grateful if my honourable friend can provide an assurance that applications from the Waveney area that support the creation of much-needed new jobs will be given full and fair consideration and will not be disadvantaged by being in a lower category area.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I thank the honourable gentleman for his question, and he gives me the opportunity to say again, it is incredibly important that those who aren't in Category 1 don't feel in any way discouraged from submitting a good quality bid. And I hope that local members will identify in their area a good quality bid that they can support, and that bid will be assessed against deliverability, value for money and strategic fit.
Link. Derek Twigg.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Halton is identified at 23rd in the index of multiple deprivation, but does not meet the criteria to be a Priority 1 area in the Levelling Up Fund or the priority area for the Community Renewal Fund. The government's criteria seriously disadvantages my constituents living within the most deprived communities in England, but not those in leafy Richmondshire, 256 in the index of multiple deprivation, which remarkably is in Priority 1. Can the Minister explain how this can by any stretch be levelling up and share publicly the data sets used by the government to perpetuate this gross inequality?
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. As I said earlier, with regard to the data sets, those are all publicly available information. And with regard to the criteria that we're using to determine where funding is targeted, there's the need for economic recovery and growth, improved transport connectivity and regeneration. And I appreciate that some places will be disappointed that they're not a Priority 1 area, but I would still encourage the honourable gentleman to work with his local council to identify a high-quality bid that they can submit for this funding, and it will be considered.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I really welcome the range of opportunities that we're being given by this government to get investment into Stroud, and the ideas are already flowing on a 20-year campaign to reopen Bristol Road, Stroud Oyster Station. We've got high street regeneration, cycling and walking schemes like the Greenway. We're going to need that sustainable, environmentally friendly transport. But for large rural constituencies like mine, we've got pockets of deprivation across the whole area. So will my right honourable friend clarify whether the government may consider a strategy bid which includes a series of connected projects to truly benefit and level up more lives across Stroud?
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. County councils with transport powers are eligible to submit one transport bid, but perhaps more pertinent to her question, local authorities may wish to consider pooling funding from their bids in order to improve the chances of taking forward a larger transport scheme.
Lydia Link. Chris Elmore.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Speaker, and can I welcome the Minister to his new place. We were sparring partners in the Whip's office with each other, so I do welcome him to his new position. I wonder if the Minister could clarify, the Levelling Up Fund means £50 million per year over the 4 years that the fund has been set out for Wales. Yet annually, according to all statistics, Wales should have been receiving £375 million in structural funding each year. The Prime Minister has promised very many times that Wales will not receive a penny less. So can the Minister tell us when he's allocating the additional shortfall of £325 million for Wales, or is it just another broken promise from the Prime Minister and the Conservatives, where they continually let the people of Wales down?
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I thank the honourable gentleman for his question and his kind words, although perhaps evaporated when we got to the question. Clearly, as I set out in my statement, it's the ambition of this government to level up across all 4 nations of the United Kingdom. And I fully appreciate that he might have some reservation with regard to the allocation of funding for the Levelling Up Fund, but there are a number of other funds that I mentioned in my statement, and taken together, I imagine that will represent significant investment for Wales.
Lydia Link. Kate Griffiths.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'm very proud of the work this government has undertaken to drive the regeneration of many of our town centres and attract people back to them. Burton, in my constituency, recently benefited from Town Deal funding. Can my right honourable friend confirm that as well as this £22.7 million of investment, Burton and Uttoxeter will also be able to secure backing from the Levelling Up Fund for other schemes, such as those that offer local road improvements or creating safe community spaces in our town centres?
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I thank my right honourable friend for her question. It's fantastic to see colleagues who have been here just over a year already securing substantial funding for their constituencies. And given the success that she's had so far, I would in no way discourage her from continuing to work with her local council to identify a high-quality bid that she can support in her constituency to continue her success in securing that ongoing funding.
Lydia Link. Alan Smith.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I wonder, can the Minister tell us how much less money will be coming to Scotland under this scheme than we would have been receiving under the EU funding scheme? And if he won't commit to sending this lesser sum of money to Holyrood and leaving it at that, how can we view this as anything other than a power grab against Scotland's powers for less money than we'd be getting independent in Europe?
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I thank the honourable gentleman for his question, and I hope he will understand that I mean him no ill when I say that I suspect the good people of Stirling will soon come to realise that they were better represented under their previous MP, my dear friend Stephen Kerr. However, in the meantime, I would imagine that his local authority will be delighted that this government is providing £125,000 to help them work up a high-quality bid so that they can draw more funding to Stirling.
Lydia Link. Simon Baines.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and may I too welcome my honourable friend to his place. Would the Minister meet with me to discuss possible projects in Clwyd South which fulfil the requirements of the Levelling Up Fund, such as Wrexham Council's bold regeneration plans and the reopening of Corwin Station on the Llangollen Steam Railway in Denbighshire?
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I thank my right honourable friend for his question. Can I just say what a great finish, to finish with questions from England, Scotland and Wales, with good news for those areas, explaining the funding that this government is going to be providing to those areas. And in the case of my honourable friend, I will hope that he works with his local area, his local council, in order to develop a priority bid that he can support, and I will be ensuring that the local government minister and the Secretary of State are aware of his invitation to come and visit the area so they can see the excellent bids that are on offer in Llangollen.
I'd like to thank the Minister for his statement and responding to 30 questions. And before we suspend for 3 minutes, I just want to say that when we go on to the main business after the 10-minute rule motion, we will be starting with a 3-minute time limit, which is a continuation of the debate from yesterday. And so I'll be reminding everybody about that later. So if we could, everybody could leave the chamber in a COVID-friendly manner in order for us to sanitize the dispatch boxes. Order!